Greetings and salutations, everyone. I do hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to, depending on wherever you may live or however you choose to read your clock, this early morning, middle of the night bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things, they really do help the channel to continue to grow and go, and they definitely do matter and are appreciated. With that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to this early morning, middle of the night bonus upload, shall we? A couple of miles north of Childress, Texas, near a curving dirt road that intersects two cotton fields, there stands a drooping, wide-limbed horse apple tree, with its largest branch broken nearly in half. It's the hanging tree, one of the most talked about landmarks in town, yet most residents know it only of hearsay. They'd prefer not to go out there, if you know what I mean, says David McCoy, the district attorney. Not that they'll tell you the place is haunted, but there's just, well, something about it. And his voice trails off. On a summer evening in 1988, a local teenager, Tate Rowland, was found hung from the tree, his body slowly twisting counterclockwise. Though the county sheriff who investigated his death would later say that every family member he interviewed couldn't imagine Tate wanting to take his own life, an eyewitness said he saw Tate hang himself, and the case was officially classified as a suicide. The episode was regarded as one of those tragic, puzzling mysteries, the act of an impulsive youth, until May of 1991, when Tate's eldest sister was found dead face down on her bed. And then, in the quiet little Childress town of 5,800 in the southeast corner of Panhandle, the panic hit like a clap of thunder. Terrifying stories that had been quietly passed around Childress since Tate's death began to emerge in the public. Tate, it was said, had been murdered by a satanic cult, devil worshippers living right in the middle of town. According to the grapevine, 10, maybe 12 cult members, the editor of the Childress Index had heard it may have been 20, were at the hanging tree that night to sacrifice Tate. His sister, 27-year-old Terry Troper, was then killed because she learned too much about the cult. Fear and suspicion spread faster than a prairie fire. Stone altars, mutilated bodies, defaced tombstones, and black-robed cult members meeting in abandoned houses were sighted. More than one person reported seeing a young Childress man eat pages from the Bible and then foam at the mouth. Another rumor had the cult searching for a blonde child to use as a human sacrifice. Every town has at least one spooky ghost story, but the events in Childress seemed too particular to be dismissed as fiction. There were too many unanswered questions about the deaths of Tate and Terry. Too many coincidences. Too many bizarre satanic-related confessions from people who said they knew about the crimes. The sheriff reopened the old cases and the district attorney convened a grand jury to investigate them. The bodies were exhumed from the Childress Cemetery. An expert on satanic occults arrived to give a seminar to the townspeople on how to spot devil worshippers, and later helped the sheriff sift through evidence. Certain citizens were subpoenaed to tell the grand jury what they knew about the cult and its members. Others freely called up the sheriff's office and provided names and phone numbers of people they believed were cult members. For those in the town who had heard about the growing international satanic conspiracy composed of secret local cults, all bent on a mission of subversion, and news about Tate and Terry served only to confirm their suspicions that the devil had come to Childress. Satan hunters had long insisted that deadly cult organizations were moving into the heartland of America, luring in new youthful recruits with sex and drugs, the lyrics of heavy metal music, and fantasy games like Dungeons and Dragons. The threat, they said, could not be taken lightly. Indeed, most law enforcement agencies in the country were placed on their staffs with specialized cult cop, an officer trained to spot satanic villainy. The Texas Department of Public Safety was sending local police departments a handout listing 30 ways to determine if someone had been killed as a result of occult ritual. Cult awareness agencies were springing up to remind the public that today's candle-burning teenager might be tomorrow's baby killer. Small towns, the experts said, were practically susceptible to cults, which look for remote areas where their activity can be more easily concealed. It was no surprise, then, that the Satan scare nearly overwhelmed Little Childress. The investigation into the death of Tate Rowland and Terry Troper became a focus of the entire community. For a few town people, however, the cult stories posed a different threat entirely. To them, the threat was the power of gossip. They saw rational thinking overcome by fright and apprehension, and yes, by the pure pleasure that comes from swapping third-hand information over a cup of coffee. When these people looked back on the events that had unfolded during the past year in Childress, they didn't see the devil exposed. What they saw was a modern-day witch hunt. In 1988, Tate Rowland was a 17-year-old, popular, good-looking kid with a wild streak. Down at the sheriff's office, he had the reputation as a hot rodder and a drinker. In his blue Ford short-bed pickup truck, with its high-dollared custom stereo system installed over in Wichita Falls, Tate would roar up and down Childress Drag, a mile-long, stoplight-dotted stretch of the United States 287 that cuts past such teen hangouts as the My Tea Burger fast food restaurant, the 24-hour car wash, and the United Supermarket parking lot. Sometimes he would drive 30 miles south to Paducah to flirt with teenage girls whose daddies had oil money. In Childress, says Bobby Reynolds, one of Tate's best friends, there isn't a whole lot for a teenager to do except ride around, chase girls, drink beer, and get in a little trouble. Actually, Childress, a former railroad town, doesn't have the typical torpid look of other small West Texas communities. It has a thriving hospital. A new state prison built at the edge of town has provided more than 300 jobs, though Childress' reputation suffered a setback earlier last year when the rotund sheriff, Claude Lane, was caught selling marijuana. Most residents prefer to focus on the town's all-American qualities, such as the local girl who was recently named first runner-up in the National Miss Teenage American pageant, and the state district judge who dresses up as Santa Claus every Christmas and passes out handmade toys. Childress remains just small enough that the movie house downtown would need to open only a couple of nights a week to accommodate everyone who wants to see a feature film. It's also small enough that it is hard to do anything that somebody else, either by accident or from simple curiosity, doesn't happen to hear about. On its flat, featureless landscape, people who love and hate each other come face to face every day. As a result, just about everyone knew Tate Rowland. Half the town liked him. The other half thought he could use a good kick in the pants. A friendly boy with an easy grin, Tate was. In the words of the district attorney McCoy, a rabble-rouser. When he would get a little beer drunk, he would scuffle, especially if he thought someone was trying to put the moves on his sometimes girlfriend, a cute pixie-sized blonde named Karen Heckler. Once Tate went after his buddy, Bobby Reynolds, because he saw Bobby and Karen in the same car. With one punch, Bobby broke Tate's jaw. I don't think Tate ever won a fight, McCoy said, but he would fight a buzzsaw. Tate's relationship with Karen, the daughter of a prominent farmer, was one of those dramatic love-hate affairs that young people seem to navigate so well. Tate and Karen were always in their cars chasing each other up and down the drag, mad or jealous at each other about something, says Ty Copeland, another of Tate's friends. The Heckler family regularly complained to the police that Karen had tried to break up with Tate, but he kept harassing her, that he stole her pocketbook and jewelry, that he had driven up to the front of her home and squealed away, his tires slinging gravel against their house. Once, when Kevin Heckler told Tate to stay away from his sister, either Tate tried to run Kevin with the pickup, or Kevin hit the side of the truck with an axe handle. The grand jury, not sure which story to believe, did not indict either boy. Frankly, a small town's criminal justice system develops a capacity for patience with its youth. Otherwise, the court's dockets would be full of criminal mischief cases. In January of 1988, the police did arrest Tate for assault after Karen charged that he had jumped over a counter at Allsup's convenience store, where she worked nights, and attempted to choke her. But when the case went before the grand jury, no indictment was issued. During the lunch break, according to McCoy, the jurors saw Karen and Tate hugging in the courthouse hallway and decided to let bygones be bygones. Nevertheless, tensions between Tate and the Hecklers reached a boiling point. Soon after the Allsups episode, Tate went to live with a relative in Louisiana. His father, Jimmy Rowland, a heavy equipment operator for the railroad, had long been telling his son to stay away from the Hecklers and Karen, who was 5 years older than Tate. They didn't think they were good for Tate, says Tate's stepmother, Brenda. Jimmy would not be interviewed. The Hecklers, in turn, claimed that Jimmy himself had threatened them. The whole thing was turning into some Hatfield and McCoy feud. Then, in the spring of 1988, while Tate was still out of town, Karen married a younger man in Childress. Tate, according to his friends, was stunned. When he returned to town that summer, he would call or run into Karen. Tate's friends and family said he briefly tried to get the relationship going again. Karen said he contacted her mostly to talk about his problems, though many of Tate's buddies would later say that he quickly returned to his old personable self. One friend admitted that Tate showed some depression over Karen, and he would have a beer or two, says Clifton Hodges, who grew up with Tate. Tate once told me that he'd like to have the country and western song played at his funeral. He stopped loving her today. If Tate was upset on July 26, 1988, he didn't show it. More than an hour before his death, around 5 in the afternoon, he was seen in the United Supermarket parking lot. He made plans with some girls to drop by the city park that evening to act as their coach for a women's softball league. He told Bobby Reynolds that he would meet him later to split a 12-pack of beer. Then he and a younger friend, Chad Johnson, got in the car and drove away. It was Chad who, at 6 o'clock, came through the front door of Jimmy and Brenda's home to tell them that Tate had hung himself. Brenda later recalled that Chad was as calm as could be, no tears in his eyes, no nothing. The three of them rushed to the site. There, according to the chilling consensus account of the events in the index, Tate's father, Jimmy Rowland, cut his son from the tree. Chad, then 15, was quiet, unpopular kid. He was new to the town. Those acquainted with him said he liked hanging around with the more popular Tate because Tate could always provide some excitement. Chad initially told the sheriff that he and Tate had driven to the small grove of trees where they liked to listen to music. According to his first version of events, Tate drank a few beers, slung a rope over the limb of the horseapple tree, and announced he was going to hang himself. He told Chad where he wanted to have his funeral. Chad thought he was kidding. Chad told the sheriff that he walked behind the car to throw a beer can into the brush and to see if anyone was watching. When he came back 3 minutes later, Tate was dead. The story presented a problem. 2 rope burns were visible on Tate Rowland's neck, one above the Adam's apple and one below. When someone's hung, the body weight inevitably pulls the chin toward the rope, so that the rope mark always above the Adam's apple. Could Tate have been strangled first with the rope, then hung up the tree to make it look like a suicide? 2 days later, Chad was interviewed again. This time he said Tate had tried to hang himself twice. First time the rope broke, according to Chad's statement. Tate said, "I can't even kill myself." They went back to Tate's house, a 5-minute drive away, and got another rope, then came back to the tree. Tate, standing on the hood of the car, tied one end around the limb and the other around his neck and stepped off the car. Chad would later say that he told different stories because he was afraid he would get in trouble for not trying to stop Tate. He insisted that Tate had talked about suicide, that Tate had been upset over Karen at the time. The sheriff's department decided there was nothing else to do. The death was ruled a suicide. The county judge, standing in for the justice of peace, saw no reason to order an autopsy, and Tate's body was prepared for burial. Rumors began to fly at the funeral. A woman dressed in black, a veil covering her face, mysteriously slipped into the back row of the packed Calvary Baptist Church. Tate's aunt, who had driven down from Amarillo, asked if anyone knew who the woman was. Apparently, no one did. The woman left before anyone could talk with her. Then, in the middle of the service, a young man sitting in one of the front rows chanted over and over a single word: suicide. A few days later, the Childress Police Department, acting on a tip from a high school student, drove to a spot only a quarter of a mile from the hanging tree and found a cow skull lodged in a small tree. Beneath the tree were logs surrounding a pile of rock. The policemen decided that they were staring at an altar. On another night, an officer driving past the cemetery saw a figure standing by Tate Rowland's grave. When the officer came by later to check again, he found spittle all over Tate's tombstone. Other unsubstantiated reports came in. A cross had been seen burning over Tate's grave. A school teacher's dog had been stolen and sacrificed. Was this the work of pranksters, kids in Childress? No doubt, like kids everywhere, cherished boogeyman tales because of one line of dialogue in the 1974 horror classic, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in which a man pretending to help a frightened girl says, "There's no local phone here. We have to drive over to Childress." The town had gained notoriety as the home of the actual chainsaw killer. The entire movie was filmed near Austin and was loosely based on an event that took place in Wisconsin. Didn't matter. At slumber parties, stories were still told about a killer on the loose. One night, for kicks, Tate had put a mask on and overalls, borrowed a chainsaw, removed the chain, and chased some giggling girls into the cemetery. The stories emerging about Tate's death, however, were far from funny. When school started the next fall, every high school student seemed to have heard that Tate was a member of a cult and had been killed by fellow cult members because he would not bring them a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child to be sacrificed. According to the story, the child was supposed to be either one of his stepmother's daughters or one of the 4 blonde daughters of his sister, Terry Troper. To make this even thicker, says the district attorney McCoy, about the same time as these rumors started, we had strangers in cars showing up at the grade school parking lot trying to pick up little kids. That's a dadgum fact. The stories emerging about Tate's death, however, were far from funny. When school started the next fall, every high school student seemed to have heard that Tate was a member of a cult and had been killed by fellow cult members because he would not bring them a blonde-haired, blue-eyed child to be sacrificed. According to the story, the child was supposed to be either one of his stepmother's daughters or one of the 4 blonde daughters of his sister, Terry Troper. To make it even thicker, says the district attorney McCoy, about the same time as these rumors started, we had strangers in cars showing up at grade school parking lots trying to pick up little kids. That's a dadgum fact. No arrest was ever made in the attempt of the kidnapping cases. Nevertheless, the information triggered waves of alarm. Tate's stepmother said she began to receive at least 10 phone calls a day from people spreading stories about the cult. I don't know if I believe them, someone would say, but here's what I heard, and another version of Tate's death would be born. What seemed initially to be an embellished speculation of high school friends suddenly turned into a full-fledged community menace. Even though a cotton farmer had been plowing a nearby field that July day when Tate was hung, investigators were told that he saw 2 boys come out to the hanging tree, then leave and return. The rumors didn't stop, and they were coming from citizens the sheriff called good, ordinary people. The children's mother says a few days before Tate's death, she saw a group of teenagers in the city park gathering some gravel, while a heavy metal song was played that mentioned Satan from a stereo system in one of the boys' cars. After they left, she looked to see what they had done. The gravel had been shaped into a perfect circle, and outside of the circle was written 666, the sign of the devil. A shiver plunged down my spine, and then back up again, the woman recalled. Children's authorities also received a bizarre phone call from the police department in Central Texas and Lockhart. A Childress girl visiting Lockhart apparently told a Lockhart girl that she had dreamt of a boy being hung by a satanic cult. The Childress girl told the Lockhart girl that she had dreamed that the cult met in an abandoned house with a red porch light in a tiny town of Kirkland, east of Childress. She said that parents were involved in the cult and that they had used a car to run down a boy a few years earlier. The sheriff's deputies began to do some checking, and yeah, there was a haunted house with a red porch light in Kirkland that had just recently burned to the ground, and a couple of years earlier, a 15-year-old boy who worked as a dishwasher at a local restaurant had been hit by a car and killed while walking home one night. On Halloween night 1988, after hearing that the cult, as part of a ritual, was going to dig up Tate's body to extract his collarbone and pinky knuckle, a group of 8 teenagers met up at the gates of the cemetery to visit Tate's grave. We thought it'd be, fun. Get some dates, go out there and see what's happening, says one of the teens, who was 17 at the time, according to this young man, who told his very story to a spellbound grand jury. Everyone piled in one pickup. We drove slowly toward the back of the cemetery where Tate's grave was. As we got closer, someone said, "Is that music?" I stopped the truck so I could hear. Then all of a sudden, he recalls, some headlights turned on where Tate's grave was supposed to be. We all started going crazy, and I whipped the truck around as fast as I could. As he roared back through the gate, someone noticed pentagrams drawn on the cemetery shed, which started everyone screaming again. The headlights kept coming closer. People jumped out of the truck and into their car and took off in several directions. The young man headed toward town in his pickup, said the lights followed him the whole way to the courthouse before finally turning off. When spoken to this young man, who was the starting lineman for Childress High School football team and is now a burly 240 pounds, he gladly relayed the story until he realized that it would be published in a magazine. "This is going to be in print?" he asked. "It is." His voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "Oh Lord, the cult's going to get me now for sure." If that wasn't enough, soon after Halloween episode came a confession made to the police by Ray Wilks, one of the town's more renegade teenagers. Ray, then 15, was arrested for stealing a car and drunkenly driving into a utility pole. According to officers, when Ray was booked, he said he was a member of that satanic cult and had been at the tree when Tate was hung. Those who were at the jail that night would later say that Ray's voice sounded, in the words of one officer, very spooky. Ray, who today sports a swastika and the words heavy metal tattooed on his forearms, denies having been at the tree or having even told that story. I don't remember saying anything because I was so drunk, he states. Yet the incident got a lot of people thinking about the Wilkses. No strangers to the police, David McCoy says. They're a bunch of outlaws. 44-year-old Frank Wilks and his 4 sons have been charged at one time or another with various felonies. Could they possibly be a part of the cult? And what were those words that had been painted, then sloppily covered up on the back of the Wilkes' home? Curious citizens drove past the ramshackled frame home in the poor southwest part of town. David McCoy concluded that writing said, "The Devil's Den," or "The Devil's Bin." A courthouse secretary swore it read, "We worship the devil." "Aw, hell," says Frank Wilks, an unemployed carpenter with a thick, hillbilly-styled beard. "That was the doing of Ray, my youngest. He was trying to win the affection of a girl, so he wrote, 'I love Letty.' I said, 'Ray, you get that shit off my wall,' so he painted over it. And now everyone thinks it says 'I love the devil.' Frank says that his 2 sons living in Childress, the other 2 live in Dallas, could not have been at Tate's hanging. They have the best alibis for that night," he stated almost proudly. "My oldest son, Darwin, was in jail, and Ray was being held at the Youth Detention Center." Rumors continued to be believed, however, if for no other reason than that they were repeated so often. Kids in town accused one another of being in the occult. Brenda Rowland did not believe everything she heard. The mysterious woman in black at the funeral, for example, was an old friend of hers. But Brenda did fuel the fires by calling kids at their home and asking them point blank if they were members of the cult. Tate's friend, Clifton Hodges, says he would not check out a book on the occult at the school library, a fear of being labeled a cult member. He was accused anyway. Clifton eventually moved out of Childress for a couple years. He says, to get away from all the talk. No one's name was slandered, however, like that of Tate's old girlfriend, Karen, for a brief period after Tate's death. Kids seeing her on the drag would hold up their fingers in the form of a cross as to ward her away. She's said to have witchcraft books and Ouija boards in her bedroom, according to town gossip. It was Karen who lured Tate into the cult. One mother in town called Karen the cult's queen bee. Karen, now 26, is a mother of 2 young boys. She works at a video rental shop in town and is not unaware of what is being said about her. "My name is smeared everywhere," she said in a soft voice, sitting one evening on a couch at her parents' farmhouse, her older son playing at her feet. "I don't know where it come from, but I don't have to listen to that garbage. Childress just wants to believe it because the town has nothing else to do." Karen pressed her hands firmly together. "I'm not going to let all that talk hurt me," she said. "People who know me and my family know none of it is true." One might have thought so. One might have figured as time passed the whole story would finally die. But then Terry Troper showed up dead. And when Childress residents heard where she died, they could not believe their ears. Terry had died in the infamous Devil's House of Frank Wilks. By all accounts, Terry Troper had been going through hard times. She had separated from her husband, had given up custody of her 4 girls, and had been running with a crowd that, as one friend delicately put it, liked to party a lot. In fact, Terry's new boyfriend was 28-year-old ex-convict named Ricky Bradford, who was then close friends with Frank Wilks' 22-year-old son, Darwin. Both Darwin and Ricky had been convicted and sent to state prison in separate cases of aggravated assault. District Attorney McCoy, never one to mince words, says they are sorry to the core. On the night of her death, Terry, Ricky Bradford, Darwin, and some friends were at the Wilks drinking. Frank Wilks, however, was not there. He was in Childress Jail for assaulting a police officer. Terry had been drinking heavily. At the autopsy, her blood alcohol level was determined to be 0.23, more than twice the legal intoxication limit. And according to Ricky Bradford, the two of them had went to bed in one small bedroom. At one point, says Ricky, Terry got up, staggered around, and the living room collapsed. She was helped back into bed. At about 9:30 the next morning, he says, his voice was flat as a fence post. I just touched her, and she was cold and stiff. I didn't even have to look at her. I just got up and informed everybody I thought she was dead. An autopsy determined that Terry had died by choking on her own vomit. Officers from Childress Police Department, finding no evidence of foul play, closed the case. Yet allegations quickly surfaced that Terry's death was somehow linked to Tate's. She never believed Tate took his own life, says Lisa Barber, a courthouse secretary and longtime friend of Terry's. Right up until her death, she never accepted it. She was hell-bent on finding out who killed him. Ricky Bradford admitted that Terry once told him that Tate had warned her to keep her daughters in the house because the cult was going to sacrifice one of them in a satanic ritual. But I've lived here all my life, Ricky said, and I've never seen any kind of cult. Ricky speculated that Terry, depressed over her family's situation, was suicidal. He said that she had already made one suicide attempt by trying to overdose on pills, and that she probably had tried again, this time was successful. Although Frank Wilks gave a statement to the police that Ricky once boasted that he was the devil, Ricky scoffed at the allegation. Oh God, he said, rolling his deep blue eyes. I don't believe in no Satan. In fact, other members of the Bradford family say it was the Wilks brothers who are associated in devil worship. I've listened to Darwin say that he works for the devil and knows the devil personally, says Ricky's sister, Letitia Broom, who is Ray Wilks' ex-girlfriend. Furthermore, says Ronnie Bradford, Ricky's younger brother, them Wilks brothers have been seen wearing black capes and doing Ouija boards and loading goats into their car. I ain't lying, Ronnie says. A group of young men, including Darwin, had once asked him to join in their graveyard to call up spirits. Frankly, it's difficult to believe the capes and Ouija boards and spirit calling would appeal to Ray and Darwin Wilks, two hard-ass blue-collar boys who can drink a couple of six-packs of beer a night and cheerfully get into fistfights with anyone who looks at them wrong. Sitting one night in the very bedroom where Terry was found dead, his arms covered with tattoos, and he had gotten in prison, Darwin rolled a cigarette, stuck it in his mouth, and said, "Aw, shit. Me and Ray do crazy things when we get pissed off at people. We say we're the masters of Satan, and we say horns are going to come out of our heads. But that's just having fun. We don't believe in anything. We are atheists. All these rumors about devil worship in this town are just made-up BS for people who are scared." Still, something seemed odd about Terry Troper's death. She was the fourth of Jimmy Rowland's 6 children to die. One died in infancy of a crib death. Another died in a car wreck. When she was 4 years old, then Tate and Terry and Jimmy and Brenda, whom he had married in 88, demanded an investigation. Tate and Terry's mother, who lives in seclusion in Childress and does not speak publicly about her children's death. The former Childress County Sheriff, Claude Lane, had adamantly refused to look into Tate Rowland case, insisting it was suicide, which in turn led to predictable rumors that he too was in the cult, part of the cover-up. But after Lane was sent to jail for dealing marijuana, the case was reopened by a new sheriff, a red-headed, straight-back Childress area native named Reese Bowen, and his young deputy, Kevin Overstreet. Both men re-interviewed witnesses. Overstreet traveled to Lockhart to double-check the story of the Childress girl's dreams. Then a few weeks after Terry's death, there came yet another astonishing twist in the case. Darwin Wilks attempted to kill himself by swallowing 25 to 30 tablets of Elavil, a mild antidepressant that has tranquilizing effects. He left a suicide note that read, "I know something that the cops don't know. I know who killed Terry. I can't live anymore." Was Darwin's note a confession, or was he saying he knew the murderer? When he recovered, he said that he didn't remember writing the note, and that he certainly didn't know who killed Terry. The sheriff wanted Darwin to take a lie detector test, but Darwin had left for Dallas. Meanwhile, a forensic pathologist from Amarillo, Dr. Sparks Vesey, had been asked to help with the investigation. He said an autopsy should have been conducted long ago on Tate after examining the photos of the 2 rope burns on Tate's neck. Vesey said it might be determined if Tate had been strangled first and then hung. July 27th, 1991, 3 years after his date, Tate's body was exhumed from the Childress Cemetery. Autopsy to determine if the death was sacrifice. Read the 3-column front page headline in the index. For the first time, the Satan rumors had gone public, and the area news media came running. One television crew reportedly obtained an interview from a solemn Childress man who said cult members could be seen dancing around bonfires on the banks of the Red River just north of town. In another interview, the boyish-looking David McCoy, a highly excitable yet respected DA, who had lost only 3 trial cases in 11 years, declared that he had received an anonymous death threat. "This is stuff movies are made of," he said. McCoy did release one intriguing piece of info. He said that the boy who was with Tate at the hanging, Chad Johnson, now living in Lubbock, had told a third story to the sheriff. In that statement, Chad and Tate didn't try to hang himself twice. He said that Tate started jacking around with the rope by swinging around the tree with it. Chad went behind the car this time to take a leak. When he came back, he saw Tate had hung himself. Because Tate's casket was not airtight, his body was too decomposed for Vesey to make any conclusive judgments about the hanging. But an autopsy test did find traces of Elavil, the same drug Darwin Wilks used to attempt suicide with. By no means a pleasure drug. It's the kind of drug that you would take and lie down and go to sleep, says McCoy. Elavil, it is suggested, could have been a very thing a cult would use to sedate someone that they were trying to kill. The rumor mill then went berserk. In September of 91, McCoy convened a grand jury to study the evidence, suicide or murder. That's the question. The normal state index asked with a Shakespearean flair. At the hearing, a great deal of gossip was repeated, but little truth came out, because some of the most important subpoenaed witnesses, including Darwin Wilks and Chad Johnson, did not show up. The grand jury did ask that Terry Troper's body be exhumed. Dr. Vesey, after studying the previous autopsy of her death, said it was unlikely that she could have choked to death since she had been lying face down. The first autopsy had been conducted by Dr. Ralph Erdman, the embattled Lubbock pathologist who had been indicted on 2 counts of misconduct. In front of television cameras and reporters, Terry's casket was lifted out of the ground. Less than a week before Halloween of 91, the new autopsy results were announced. Terry had died of asphyxiation, most likely smothered. The report said that contusions on her body, especially on her inner thigh, and bruises on her mouth, indicated blunt trauma, likely occurring during the assault. McCoy told the press that more than one person may have been involved in her killing. Someone held her down while the other did the smothering. There was another thing found in Terry's body, alveoli, though Vassy warned that he could only be 70% certain that Terry Troper's death was murder. McCoy vowed that he would pursue the case as a homicide. At that point, it was hard to find anyone in Childress who did not believe a cult was on the loose. The more the rumors were mentioned, the more they grabbed the imaginations of the townsfolk. Word spread that the cult had been seen meeting at a mobile home factory or a dry cleaning store, that a baby lamb with its heart cut out had been found near a cotton gin, that the Childress man had shown he had powers of Satan by pointing at a cat and commanding it to die. When the First Baptist Church of Childress presented a Satanist seminar, more than 450 residents listened intently as the occult expert told of cults luring teens with heavy metal music and teaching them to dig up coffins at the cemetery and have sex with their bodies. As fear swept the town, the grand jury reconvened. Darwin Wilks still could not be found. And Ricky Bradford did not appear as well, but just about everyone else did. Regarding Terry's death, it was learned that the alveoli probably came in from Frank Wilks' elderly father. Frank himself took the stand to say that Darwin told him that Terry had been murdered by another person in the house that night, but no one who was at the house would confess a thing. Outside the grand jury room, tempers flared. Brenda Rowland got into a shoving match with Brenda Stokes, the sister of Terry and Tate's mother. Brenda Stokes accused Brenda Rowland of hitting Tate and Terry while they were alive. "You better quit lying to me," repeated Brenda Rowland, and they started pushing each other. Then most of the Hackler family arrived at the courthouse to clear their names. Karen's younger sister testified that on the day Tate died, he had called the Hacker home and said he wanted to kill himself, and Karen said she knew nothing about the cult. When the Hackers emerged from the grand jury room, the girl's father, James Ray, wearing a big white cowboy hat, angrily thrust a briefcase at a photographer trying to take the picture of his family. A stocky Chad Johnson arrived, repeated his third hanging story, and stuck to his claim that Tate's death was a suicide. According to McCoy, Chad's testimony was that Tate thought Karen was messing with his mind and that Tate got sick of it, and Tate thought he could make her feel sorry. So, why he was there, a second rope mark on Tate's neck? Chad couldn't or wouldn't say. Who killed Terry Troper? McCoy could only reply, "We're one witness away from knowing that." The grand jury ended its work with just as many questions as answers. For 4 months, that's where the matter stood. Then, this past March, the case broke wide open again. Frank and Darwin Wilks arrived at the sheriff's department to say that Ricky Bradford admitted at a barbecue at their home the previous night that he had killed Terry. The Wilks alleged Ricky had threatened to kill them if they snitched. Darwin said Ricky had become provoked by questions about Terry's death. According to Darwin, Ricky had said, "Yes, I killed that bitch," and then threatened to burn down Frank's home and cut out Darwin's eyes if he told. Based on new information, the sheriff arrested Ricky for first-degree murder. Ricky insisted that he had nothing to do with killing Terry, claimed Darwin had set him up. Ricky said Darwin was broke, and by making that statement about Terry's murder, Darwin knew he could get a $1,000 reward that the sheriff's department was offering. The sheriff's department confirmed that Darwin had been given the reward money. In fact, Darwin did admit to me that he had been worried that the police were going to arrest him. He said he finally submitted to a lie detector test a few weeks before Ricky's arrest and had flunked when asked by the examiner if he had smothered Terry. "The cops were trying to frame me," Darwin said, "but hell, I was asleep the whole time she was supposedly have been killed. I couldn't have smothered anyone." After Ricky's arrest, Darwin took another polygraph test and passed it. In truth, no one seems convinced that the latest turn of events clears up Terry's death. David McCoy admits that with the inconclusive autopsy and list of unreliable witnesses, he doesn't have a strong case against Ricky, as he would like to have. He says that before going to trial sometime this summer, he wants to give another lie detector test to all the witnesses. Ricky Bradford is a sorry individual, McCoy says, but I don't want to send him to prison for just being sorry. What the latest publicity about Troper's case has triggered, of course, is a rash of even more satanic rumors and cult sightings. A few days after Ricky's arrest, for instance, a white cat with its heart cut out was found on the roadside of the town. Sheriff Bowen and his deputy dutifully went out with a squad car to take colored photographs of the dead animal. I don't know what it means, says Bowen, shaking his head slowly, but it's got to mean something. Then, just before Ricky's murder charge went to the grand jury, David McCoy's house mysteriously burnt to the ground. The the fire marshal said it was an accident, but the first thing I thought was that somebody was after me, McCoy stated. I still wonder if that's not what happened. Anything could be made to look accidental. A few weeks later, a middle-aged couple was found in possession of strange works of art. Some were pornographic, and some were interpreted as, well, satanic. In one, a devilish goat's head was drawn on a human body. In another, an outline of Texas was drawn inside an emblem that looks like a pentagram. Also found in the house was a thick metal rod that McCoy describes as some kind of staff that a priest of a cult/organization is supposed to have. Such publicity has certainly damaged Childress' image. One woman from a nearby town of Kewanna stopped by Childress Courthouse and asked if it was safe to drive US 83 at night, considering that's where the cult allegedly worshipped. An Amarillo reporter covering the story wouldn't even come to Childress without carrying a gun. We all feel violated by the attention, says Nancy Garriston, a rancher's wife and the district clerk of the courthouse. There are kids in Childress doing great things, really great things. They're not cults. In fact, to this day, no person in Childress has confessed to membership of the cult, nor has Sheriff Bowen or his deputy been able to find any concrete evidence that a satanic cult ever operated in his town. In the end, Tate's death might have been truly one of those tragic, impulsive, suicidal acts of a youth. Terry's death, while possibly murder, was more likely due to personal problems than supernatural ones. Was there truly a satanic menace, or was it all a hoax, a haunting 12th century reminder of the days of the Salem witch trials? It will be a long time before some of the families, like the Hacklers, put their lives back together. We lived in this county all our lives, says James Ray Hackler, who blames McCoy for taking advantage of Tate's death to get publicity for himself. We are victims of lies. The Rowlands, who still aren't speaking to the Hacklers, said they are two victims. Their children are dead, and no one to account for. There must have been something to this, said Brenda Rowland. Or else these rumors wouldn't have gotten started. Rumors don't get started for nothing, you know. A few people, targets the rumors, have moved on to other towns. The Bradfords, the Wilks, don't plan on leaving, despite the blight on their reputations. Darwin Wilks' young girlfriend just gave birth to the first baby, but every time she goes out of her house just to go someplace like the grocery mart, people make her cry by saying, "Oh, you're the one who had Satan's baby." Darwin, incidentally, left that girl and plans to remarry his ex-wife. As for Frank Wilks, no one's hiring him, not even for part-time farm work. People won't have nothing to do with me, he says. When I get near them, they step back and say, "Don't you put a spell on me." But Frank takes the philosophical view of his troubles. One evening, he was out drinking at the VFW hall with one of his girlfriends, a woman who the whole town thinks is a high priestess just because she's seen with him. He says, another woman approached and told them her boyfriend had a skin rash. did he and his girlfriend have a magic potion. According to Frank, his girlfriend went into the bathroom, poured some calamine lotion in a glass, walked back and said, "Rub this all over him and it'll go away." "It worked," Frank said, "and that old gall lighter thanked us. So hell, maybe something good came out of this mess after all." And there you have it, folks. I do hope you all enjoyed this early morning, middle of the night bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you, and I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps the channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. Keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and our friends. These creatures are real. These events have happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.